Take a moment to think of a place that you would consider your personal Eden. It might be your childhood home, a place where you met your first love, somewhere that inspires you or simply makes you feel safe. Now imagine this place becoming tainted by something vile and despicable, something that exists only to wither and destroy the life force that makes this place so special to you. It's a snake that poisons your happiness, like a painful negative thought that you would wish to forget. If that Garden of Eden allegory didn't appear any more obvious, keep it in mind because it'll be relevant later, but regardless, that doesn't begin to describe the emotional delirium sustained throughout the Wailing's 2.5-hour runtime. While that's a daunting investment for any horror movie, trust me, it uses that time to deliver one of the most spellbinding and provocative pieces of supernatural storytelling to emerge in the 21st century. The Wailing tells the story of a mysterious infection that plagues the local village of Goxiong, causing its inhabitants to succumb to madness and murder their families before they themselves rot away in agony. However, that's just the tip of the iceberg, as soon police officer Zhang begins having nightmarish visions of a foreign Japanese man who villagers claim has something to do with the outbreak, as it began soon after his arrival. Now, I will delve deeper into the mystery as it unfolds later in the video, but firstly, let's paint a picture of what kind of experience the Wailing presents. The Wailing trusts the audience to have the patience to let its horror slowly ferment into something complex and insidious, as opposed to just throwing in a few displaced scares every 10 minutes to make sure you're still awake and paying attention. It's a bold and confident story, one that doesn't bow to the demands of a low attention span audience by giving itself the necessary breathing room to build its serene world and quirky yet muted characters before naturally starting to show how these strange and startling circumstances begin taking a tangible, devastating toll on them. In fact, the Wailing's horror doesn't really impose itself until the second half of the story. Until then, it lets its suspicions and implications linger and manifest enigmatically in the background until Zhang begins having a personal stake in the mystery when his daughter becomes infected and the true evil of the story begins to reveal itself. In a way, the Wailing style is quite comparable to The Exorcist, with shades of Ringu, Ju-on, I Saw the Devil, and memories of murder. It has this uncompromising depiction of inconsequential violence and tragedy against the innocent, and an unfiltered portrayal of faith, belief systems, and superstition when it comes to making sense of things that are seemingly outside human comprehension. At first, The Wailing begins as a brooding crime thriller, as Jong-gu and his partner inspect various murder scenes and try to piece together some rationale as to how this infection has caused such a disturbingly violent hysteria. It doesn't explicitly direct you towards anything too supernatural early on, other than the mysterious Japanese man whose strange, eerie presence is fueled by conflicting rumors and paranoid myths until we finally meet him for ourselves. But even then, we're still not sure as to who or even what he really is. The story taps into the social malaise created by abnormal events that are completely alien to people who live such innocuous, isolated lives. Since murder and disease are so uncommon to this undisturbed little town, suddenly everybody is looking for someone or something to blame for the collapse of harmony, and naturally their instinct is to blame the one foreign presence that's intruded their lives: the unwelcome stranger. The film exposes peace as an attribute to fear, in that the locals eventually resort to aggressive measures to preserve it by violently forcing the Japanese man out of town merely because of their prejudice. Their version of peace isn't idealistic, it's simply about maintaining the status quo, which, as the moody tone of the setting and characters show, is somewhat defensive and apathetic. These people are desperate for an answer, and even more so a solution to a problem they can't really explain, and when push comes to shove, they resort to myths and superstitions that just reinforce their paranoia, rather than give them any sense of solace. The idea that these villagers have built a barrier around themselves to ward off outside evil is not only accentuated by the secluded mountain setting, but by perpetuating the walls built around Jung-goo's home just as the infection reaches his daughter. From this point, Jung-goo takes a personal investment in the chaos, and his journey becomes fueled by uncontrollable emotional anguish, the wailing so to speak, and he begins to overcome his reluctance to do everything in his power to protect those that he loves. However, I think it's simplistic to say the Wailing is about one particular thing, because the story is so rich with character and cultural complexity that it's open to a magnitude of interpretations, and it's certainly not going to give you any clear answers either, especially given the deceptive and meticulous nature of its villain. It's worth noting that while it is indeed a horror movie, it definitely doesn't let it dictate the overall tone of the story. It covers almost every basis of the genre, from disease to ghosts to zombies to deranged killers to demons to the psychological and so on. Again, like The Exorcist, it's willing to indulge more in cultural traditions and human drama to really ground its more otherworldly elements in reality, rather than simply use them for surface level scares. Its depiction of shamanism takes a major precedence to the story, after it's assumed those infected are actually possessed by a demon in the form of someone who lives among them. At this point, it calls back to that Garden of Eden reference I made in the beginning, like when the devil took the form of a snake to tempt Adam and Eve into eating the forbidden fruit. In the Wailing, Jung-goo is manipulated and led down an uncertain path where he doesn't know if it is good or not. While the Japanese man is the clear suspect, there are moments where he shows weakness and fear, as a mysterious woman in white watches over him and eventually Jung-goo, making it unclear if we can even trust her as well. Sure, there are biblical metaphors that greatly allude to the truth, but the main point comes from its opening quote from Luke chapter 24 verses 37 to 39, where upon the resurrection of Jesus, his people thought he was a ghost, but how can that be if he's made of flesh and bone? The local deacon calls attention to this passage right at the end of the story, where he demands to know the true form of the evil, rejecting faith as an answer and believing that only in physical form can the truth surely reveal itself. Now, I can't really go any further thematically without getting into major spoilers, so consider this your final warning before I start to reveal what the hell is actually going on, so brace your arse cheeks. While it is debatable how much of the film is an allegory for faith, given Jung-goo is pulled in various directions without any clarity as to who he should trust, it builds further on the motif of figurative and literal walls and barriers we create to protect ourselves, where just like how evil is seemingly invited into Jung-goo's home, as we'll soon come to see, Jung-goo has to be willing to lower his internal defenses to let good in. Of course, it comes at the cost of inviting further evil into his life, but like with the snake in the Garden of Eden, there is no way to know for sure who is good and who is bad. A lot of it is ultimately blind faith. The introduction of the shaman is where this becomes even more complicated, as the shaman is invited into Jung-goo's home to perform rituals that are genuinely authentic to Korean culture, in the hopes of exorcising the demon possessing Jung-goo's daughter. He seeks out hexes and cursed objects around Jong-goo's premises and looks to banish it, but only if Jong-goo does not tamper with his methods, which ultimately he does, and his daughter's condition worsens. Eventually, after Jong-goo and some of the locals have rid the town of the Japanese man by dumping his body off the mountain, the shaman returns to Jong-goo's home but is unable to enter because the woman in white has set a curse, prompting the shaman to contact Jong-goo, realizing that the Japanese man was actually a shaman like himself and was simply trying to exorcise the woman in white, who was the real evil spirit this entire time. However, Jong-goo is then confronted by the woman in white himself, who tells him the exact opposite and claims that the shaman and the Japanese man are in cahoots and trying to manipulate Jong-goo into basically helping them destroy the woman's traps, which we assumed were evil all along. This leaves Jong-goo trapped in the middle of deciding who to finally trust, the woman or the shaman. If he returns to his home, the trap will be destroyed and his daughter will fall victim to the infection after killing her family, but if he waits, how does he truly know if she's telling the truth? You can probably see where I'm coming at with the whole faith allegory, yet human weakness ultimately prevails, and Jong-goo goes home in desperation, destroys the trap, and his family fall victim to the same fate as everyone before them. Yes, the shaman and the Japanese man are in cahoots this entire time, and upon confronting the Japanese man himself, the deacon sees him for who he truly is, a demon represented by a plague disguised in the form of a man. I'm not going to sit and explain every fine detail, as I believe it's best you experience it for yourself because, again, it's heavily interpretable. But what I think is so powerful about the story is how much of the emotional core is built around reluctance. Most of us hate confrontation. We avoid it because it forces us to confront not only the external problem, but the one buried deep within us. Like with how the shaman, the woman in white, and the Japanese man are all hiding behind flesh and bone to disguise who they really are, humans are practically the same. We hide our fears and insecurities, and when we're forced into challenging circumstances, it's only human for us to let go of thought and reason and unleash our wailing emotions. In the case of Jong-goo, what we see of him in the first half of the story prior to his personal involvement is essential to understanding where his journey ends. In a way, he's taken his life for granted. He's typically late for work, he's lazy, he has no ambition, he's a bit uncaring and incompetent, and for someone who is meant to protect and serve the people, he's a coward. That's not to say he's negligent or irredeemable or that these problems are rebukable. What I'm saying is he's just as flawed as you and I, and is indifferent to problems that are not his own. And so, having built walls and shelter around his home to ward off all of these external problems, he's trapped himself along with his family in his own problems. Theoretically, he is the one being punished, as you can interpret all of his behaviour as indicative of the 7 deadly sins of lust, greed, gluttony, sloth, envy, wrath, and eventually pride, when faced with the ultimate decision of just having patience and trust, even though evil has made it practically impossible to decipher the truth. I suppose if I were to summarise the true horror of the Wailing, it's less about the broader fear of the unknown, and more about how we can never truly know the motives buried deep within those around us. It's a story that taps into our human impulses and instincts, and how regardless of our logical moral standards, when we feel threatened or under fire, it's only natural that we unleash the inner animal that we truly are.